The smell of hospitals is a unique kind of betrayal. It's not just the antiseptic, the bleach, the faint, sweet undertone of decay they try so hard to mask. It's the smell of forced cheer, of bad coffee from a vending machine that's been broken since 1998, of hope curdling into dread. I sat on the crinkly paper of the examination table, my trousers around my ankles, feeling every one of my 78 years in the chill of the air against my skin. Dr. Evans, a good man with the tired eyes of someone who's delivered more bad news than good, was staring at a light box on the wall, my MRI scans glowing like some ghostly, malevolent constellation. He didn't speak for a long time. That was the first confirmation. You don't need a medical degree to understand the language of a prolonged silence in a room like this. Landon, he finally said, his voice softer than usual, the way you talk to a spooked animal. I wish I had better news. I grunted. I've never been one for platitudes. Out with it, Evans. Is it the big C? Don't sugarcoat it for me. I'm too old for sweeteners. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound, and turned to face me. Pancreatic cancer. It's advanced. He used words like aggressive, inoperable, and palliative care. They floated around the sterile room, wasps, buzzing with a deadly intent. He talked about timelines, about months, not years, about quality of life, about making arrangements. Funny, you think you'll feel something profound in a moment like that, a seismic shift in your soul, but I just felt cold, and then, a strange, crystalline clarity, the kind I used to get in the boardroom 40 years ago, right before I eviscerated a competitor. My mind wasn't on my own mortality, it was on them, my family, my legacy, the vultures, Eleanor, my daughter, with her designer tears and her hand permanently outstretched, waiting for the next infusion of cash to maintain a lifestyle her useless husband couldn't hope to afford. Her two boys, my grandsons, Carl and Brett, who viewed me not as a grandfather, but as a malfunctioning ATM that occasionally asked about their lives. My nephew, Derek, a parasite in a suit, who only ever called when he needed a bridge loan that he never had any intention of repaying. They were all waiting for me to die, waiting for the reading of the will, waiting to tear apart everything it built with my own two hands, with my sweat and my sacrifice, and turn it into sports cars and cocaine and bad investments. A cold fury began to burn in my gut, hotter than the cancer growing there. They didn't deserve a penny. They deserved nothing but the memory of their own greed. Dr. Evans was still talking, his face a mask of professional sympathy. And we can start you on a course of chemotherapy. Try to slow the progression. Give you some more time. No, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He blinked. Landon, I understand it's a lot to process, but, I said, no chemo, no treatment. You're not going to poison what little time have left to make me a sicker version of myself, just to add a few miserable weeks to the tally. I looked him dead in the eye. And you're not going to tell anyone, not a soul. Landon, your family has a right too. My family has a right to nothing, I snapped, cutting him off. This is my death, Evans, mine, and I'll manage it as I see fit. This stays between us. Doctor-patient confidentiality. You will not put this in any report that can be accessed. You will not discuss it with a colleague in the hallway. Is that understood? He looked conflicted, his ethics warring with the sheer force of my will. I'd known him for 20 years, head golfed at my club. I'd donated to his hospital's new wing. He owed me. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. A slow, grim smile spread across my face. It felt alien on my lips. I'm going to conduct an experiment. One last bit of due diligence. The drive home from the hospital was different. The world hadn't changed. The sun was still shining on the manicured lawns of my neighborhood. Kids were still playing in sprinklers. But I was seeing it all through a new filter, a lens tinted with impending finality. Every house, every car, every laughing face was temporary, especially mine. I pulled my old Mercedes into the circular driveway of the house I'd built for Clara. Our house. She'd been gone 10 years now, and not a day went by that I didn't miss her steadying presence. She was the only one whoever saw through the bullshit, mine included. She would have understood what I was about to do. She might even have approved. The house was too big for one man, a sprawling monument to success that now felt like a beautifully appointed tomb. I walked through the silent halls, my footsteps echoing on the polished marble, and went straight to my study. I poured the fingers of a Macallan 25 that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and I sat in the leather chair that had molded itself to my shape over the decades. And I planned. The diagnosis was my secret weapon, a piece of intelligence that none of the other players in this final game knew. I would use it. I would lie. I picked up the phone. My hand was steady. The whiskey was smooth and smoky in my throat. I called Eleanor first. "Dad," she answered on the third ring, her voice slightly breathless, as if it interrupted something terribly important. Probably choosing new throw pillows. "Is everything all right?" "No, Eleanor," I said, letting a tremor I didn't have creep into my voice. "No, it's not. I just got back from seeing Evans." A sharp intake of breath. Dramatic. Perfect. "Oh my God. What is it?" "Your heart." It's my brain," I said, the lie coming easily, fluidly. They found something. Tests. Shadows. Evans says it's likely early onset dementia. The aggressive kind. He called it, what was it, PKA? Posterior cortical atrophy. Affects the vision. Spatial reasoning leads to full dementia. He says it's a swift progression. I could hear her mind working, a calculator clicking behind her eyes. Dementia. Not immediately terminal, but debilitating. Expensive. A long, slow drain on the estate. A complication. "Oh, Daddy," she wailed, the tears now sounding real, though I knew they were for herself, for her complicated future, not for me. "I'm coming over right now. Well, figure this out. Don't you worrying about a thing." Within the hour, the circus had come to town. Eleanor arrived with her husband, Mark, a man so bland and ineffectual he seemed to fade into the wallpaper. His handshake was always limp. His opinions always mirrored whoever held the most power in the room. Right now, that was Eleanor. Kyle and Brett slouched in next, smelling of weed and entitlement. Kyle, the older one at 25, gave me a clumsy pat on the shoulder. "Hey, Pops, sucks about your brain." Brett, 22, just nodded, already scrolling through his phone, no doubt alerting his friends to the buzzkill that was his grandfather's impending mental decline. Finally, Derek arrived, oozing unctuous concern. "Uncle Landon," he said, grasping my hand in both of his. "I'm so sorry. We'll get through this. Together. I'll handle everything. You just focus on your health." And there it was, the first play. "I'll handle everything." The words of a man already measuring the curtains. I let my shoulders slump. I let my gaze go slightly unfocused. I fumbled slightly as I put my whiskey glass down. I was Landon Birch, titan of industry, reduced to a confused old man, and they bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. The following week was the beginning of the test. Phase 1, the vulture circle. Eleanor started with the safety angle. "Dad, this house is too much for you. All these stairs, and what if you forget and leave the stove on? We should think about selling it. You could move into a lovely, manageable apartment in one of those new assisted living complexes. They have activities." What she meant was, liquidate the major asset now, while I can still influence you, and free up the capital. I shook my head, feigning confusion. "But this is my home. Clara's home. I know where the spoons are." Mark chimed in, his voice placating. "Now, Al, let's not rush him. It's a lot to process." But his eyes were on the Picasso sketch, the study. Head always like that. Derek's approach was more financial. He came over with a folder, always a folder. "Uncle Landon, with this diagnosis we need to think about power of attorney. The bills still need to be paid. Investments managed. It's a burden you shouldn't have to bear. I'd be happy to step in. As a family duty." He slid the papers across my desk. I made a show of peering at them, then pushing them away weakly. "So many words, Derek. My eyes get tired. Maybe next week." The boy's strategy was the simplest. And the most pathetic, they just started asking for things more brazenly, sensing a closing window of opportunity. "Pops," Cole said, "my car is basically on its last legs. A 2015 BMW is practically a death trap. I've been looking at this Porsche Cayman. It's a really solid investment. Safe, you know." Brett went for the emotional play. "Grandad, this trip to Bali, it's not just a vacation. It's for my wellness, my mindfulness. This news has been so hard on me. I need to recenter myself. It's basically therapy." I denied them nothing, not directly. I just mumble, well see, or talk to your mother, or simply pretend I hadn't heard them, lost in my supposed mental fog. Their frustration was a palpable thing, a heat coming off them in waves. They weren't worried about me. They were worried the ATM was malfunctioning before they could make their final, big withdrawal. I documented it all. Not on paper. I didn't need to. I branded every greedy word, every avaricious glance, onto my memory. Their true faces, unmasked by the prospect of my weakness, were all the evidence I needed. After 2 weeks of this, I decided to up the ante. Phase 2, the precipitous decline. I started using a cane I didn't need, a handsome mahogany one I'd bought on a trip to London decades ago. It'd shuffle around the house, occasionally bumping into door frames. I'd call Eleanor by her mother's name, and then look confused when she corrected me. I hired a private nurse, not for medical care, but as a prop. Anna was a stern, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who, for a generous cash payment, was happy to play her part. She'd answer the door and announce to visitors in a grave tone, "Mr. Birch is having a less lucid day today." She'd cluck her tongue and make notes on a clipboard, all theatre, all perfectly designed to sell the narrative. The family's behaviour shifted, hardened. The veneer of concern grew thinner, more brittle. Eleanor stopped talking about assisted living and started making declarations. "Dad, I've spoken to the realtor. She's coming on Tuesday. We need to do this." It'd just stare out the window. The roses need pruning. Clara always loved the yellow ones. Derek became more insistent with his paperwork. "Uncle Landon, just your signature here. It's just a formality. For your own good." It'd pretend to doze off in the middle of his sentence. The boy stopped asking and started taking. It'd forget that Brett had borrowed a rare first edition from my library. It'd not notice that a pair of my gold cufflinks had gone missing, the ones Kyle had always admired. The climax of the charade came during what I decided would be a very bad day. I had Anna call a family meeting. They all assembled in my living room, their faces a mixture of impatience, greed, and a thin, fraying veil of supposed pity. I was in my armchair, a blanket over my knees even though it was 75 degrees outside. I let my head loll slightly. I made my hands tremble. Hayes had a difficult morning, Anna intoned, standing behind me like a grim sentinel, very confused. Hayes been talking about his childhood a lot. Eleanor leaned forward. "Daddy, it's us. We're all here." I blinked slowly, looking at them as if I didn't quite recognize them. Then I let a tear well up in my eye. A real one. I thought of Clara. I thought of the empty, lonely years without her. I thought of the cancer, a real and hungry thing inside me, and the utter loneliness of bearing that secret. The tear was genuine. It sold the performance better than any Oscar winner could have. "I'm scared," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I don't want to forget. I don't want to be a burden." Eleanor's face softened for a fleeting second, a glimpse of the little girl she used to be, before the avarice took root. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cool, practical efficiency. "You're not a burden, Dad. We're here. We'll take care of everything. You just need to let us." Her eyes flicked to Derek, a silent signal. Derek moved forward, pulling the dreaded folder from his briefcase. "Uncle Landon, we can make it all easier. This establishes me as your power of attorney. It lets me help you, to pay your bills, to manage your assets, so you don't have to worry." He held out a pen. It was the moment of truth. Would the old lion, even in his feigned weakness, balk at signing away his kingdom? I looked at the pen as if it were a strange, metallic insect. I let my trembling hand reach for it. I fumbled, almost dropped it. I looked at the line on the document, a black line that represented everything he'd built. Then I looked up at their faces. Eleanor, leaning forward, her lips parted slightly. Mark, looking nervously at his wife. Derek, oozing fake reassurance. Kyle and Brett, bored but aware that something important was happening. I dragged the tip of the pen across the page. It wasn't a signature. It was a ragged, shaky line, a childish scrawl. I let the pen drop from my fingers and clatter on the floor. Tired, I slurred, letting my eyes close. So tired. There was a collective, barely suppressed sigh of frustration. So close. It's okay, Uncle Landon, Derek said, unable to keep the disappointment out of his voice. Well, try another day. As they filed out, whispering amongst themselves, I kept my eyes closed, a cold smile playing on my lips inside my mind. They'd shown their hands completely now. They weren't just vultures circling, they were ready to land and start pecking, while I was still breathing. The performance was a masterpiece, but the real work was just beginning. The anger that had been a cold burn in my gut was now a roaring fire. They had confirmed my every low expectation. They had earned their fate. Now, I had to build their punishment, and I had to do it with the clock ticking, not from the fake dementia, but from the very real, very silent killer growing inside me. Every day of fatigue, every twinge of pain, was a reminder that my time was finite. I would use every last second of it not to find peace, but to ensure my revenge was absolute, airtight, and utterly devastating. The game was on, and they didn't even know they were playing. The silence after they left was heavier than any he'd ever known. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first skirmish, the air still vibrating with the echoes of their greed. I waited until I heard the last car door slam, the last engine fade down the long driveway. Then I opened my eyes. The blanket was off my legs in one swift motion. The slight, practiced tremor in my hands stilled. I stood up, my back straight, the cane I'd been leaning on now just a piece of wood in my grip. I walked to the bar, my steps firm and sure on the Persian rug, and poured another 2 fingers of Macallan. This one I drank not as a prop, but as a fuel. Anna, my co-conspirator in this grim theatre, came back into the room. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. She'd seen the performance, heard their whispers in the hall. They're gone, she stated. They are, I said, the feigned weakness gone from my voice, replaced by a cold, hard edge, and they are exactly who I thought they were. The pen thing was a nice touch, she remarked, picking up the discarded folder from the floor. She glanced at the chaotic scribble that was supposed to be my signature. Childlike, convincing. They were so close they could taste it, I said, the ice in my glass clinking as I took another sip. Derek was already mentally spending the liquidation fees. Eleanor was picking out paint swatches for my lovely, manageable apartment, which is code for a white-walled cell where I can't cause any trouble. I turned to look out the window at the grounds Clara had loved so much. The game is set, Anna. Now comes the move. Phase 3 of my operation, I had a different kind of performance. It required me to be Landon Birch again, the man I used to be, the shark. It required leaving the house. The next morning, I told Eleanor I had a good day coming on. I felt clear. I was going to take a drive, for old time's sake. She protested, of course. It was unsafe. What if I got confused? What if I forgot where I was? I'm going to the club, Eleanor, I said, layering just the right amount of brittle pride into my voice. I need to feel normal, just for an hour. I could practically hear her calculating. The club was safe. People knew me there. If I wandered off, someone would bring me back. It was a contained environment. She relented, with the condition that I call her the moment I got home. I dressed not in the cardigans and soft trousers I'd been affecting, but in a crisp, tailored suit. I left the cane by the door. Looking in the mirror, I saw the ghost of the old Titan. The eyes were a little more sunken, the skin a little looser on the frame, but the set of the jaw was the same. The iron will was still there, burning brighter than ever, fueled by a righteous fury. The drive to the city was a tonic, the power of the Mercedes responding to my touch, the familiar route, the sense of purpose. It was the first real thing it'd done in weeks. I wasn't Landon the dementia patient. I was Landon the architect of my own legacy, and now architect of their ruin. My destination wasn't the club. It was a nondescript office building in the financial district, 20 stories of glass and steel. I took the elevator to the 18th floor, to the offices of Sterling, Croft, and Vance, old money lawyers, the kind who didn't advertise, whose clients were generations deep. My lawyer, Arthur Vance, had handled my affairs since his father retired. He was discreet, brilliant, and understood that my word was law. His secretary, a woman who had probably been born with a stern expression, didn't bat an eye at my appearance. Mr. Birch, M.R. Vance is expecting you. Arthur's office was all dark wood, leather, and legal volumes. He stood up from behind his massive desk, a man in his late 60s with the sharp eyes of a hawk. He came around to shake my hand, his grip firm. "Landon, good to see you. You look well." There was a question in his tone. Head undoubtedly heard the family whispers. "I look like a man who's been declared mentally unfit by his loving family." "Arthur," I said, getting right to the point. I sat in the client chair without being asked. "Sit down. We have business." Arthur slowly returned to his seat, steepling his fingers. "I've heard some murmurs. Eleanor called me. She was concerned about your capacity. She mentioned power of attorney." "Of course she did," I said, a dry, humorless laugh escaping my lips. "She and my nephew Derek are practically tripping over each other to get control of the checkbook. They think I have dementia." Arthur's eyebrows rose slightly. "And do you?" "No, Arthur, I do not have dementia." I leaned forward, my voice dropping, though the office was secure. "I have pancreatic cancer. Terminal." Evans gave me months. The professional calm on Arthur's face cracked. True shock registered there. "Landon, my God. I'm so sorry. Why this charade?" "Due diligence," I said, the words crisp and clear. I needed to know, without a shadow of a doubt, who they truly were. And they have shown me, in spectacular, avaricious detail. They are vultures. They see me not as a father, a grandfather, an uncle, but as a failing corporation whose assets need to be stripped before the final bankruptcy. I laid it out for him. The immediate push to sell the house, Derek's relentless power of attorney campaign, the boys' increased demands for cars and trips, the attempted signature. I didn't need to embellish. The truth was damning enough. Arthur listened, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. He knew my family, of course. Had drawn up the previous wills, the trusts for the grandchildren. Had seen the surface-level dynamics. Now, I was showing him the rotten core. "So," I finished, my voice cold and flat, "they have confirmed they deserve nothing. Not a single cent. My task now is to ensure that outcome. I want a new will. I want new trusts. I want to make it absolutely, irrevocably, and legally ironclad that every single thing I own, every stock, every bond, every piece of property, every goddamn spoon in my drawer goes anywhere but to them." Arthur nodded slowly, the strategist in him taking over from the friend. "Okay, we can do that, but we have to be exceptionally careful. If they are already questioning your capacity, any drastic changes will be challenged. They will argue you weren't of sound mind when you made the new will. They'll point to your diagnosis. They'll bring in doctors, use your own performance against you." "I know," I said. "That's why you're going to help me build a fortress around it. We need a paper trail. We need evidence of my lucidity that is more powerful than their lies." For the next 2 hours, we plotted. It was more complex and satisfying than any corporate takeover he'd ever engineered. First, I would undergo a full, independent psychiatric evaluation, not with a doctor connected to Evans or the hospital, but with a renowned specialist Arthur knew at the university, a doctor known for his integrity and his thoroughness. I would be tested, interviewed, and declared to be in full, unimpeachable possession of my mental faculties. The report would be sealed with my lawyer, to be opened only in the event of a challenge. Second, we would video record the signing of the new will. On camera, I would calmly and clearly state my full name, the date, and declare that I am of sound mind and body, free from any undue influence. I would articulate, in detail, my reasons for disinheriting my family, citing their specific actions and behaviors during the time of my feigned illness. I wouldn't be emotional. I would be factual, cold, and precise. A CEO explaining a necessary but difficult restructuring. Third, I would create a dossier, a log, with dates and details of every single instance of their greed. Eleanor's push to sell the house, Derek's power of attorney attempts, the boys' requests, the stolen cufflinks, the borrowed book. Anna would provide a sworn affidavit of what she witnessed as my nurse. It would be a chronicle of their moral bankruptcy. Where do you want the assets to go, Landon? Arthur asked, his pen poised over a legal pad. We need to name beneficiaries. If not them, then who? This was the part I'd been savoring, the final twist of the knife. The majority of the estate, I said, will go to establish the Clara and Landon Birch Foundation. Its sole purpose will be the funding and maintenance of animal sanctuaries, specifically for abused and neglected working animals, plough horses, carriage horses, retired police dogs. Clara always loved animals more than most people. It's fitting. Arthur allowed himself a small smile. She did indeed. A fine tribute. As for the house, I continued, it is not to be sold. It, and the endowment for its perpetual upkeep, will be bequeathed to the local historical society. It will become a museum, open to the public, tour twice a day. I want schoolchildren traipsing through the halls where my grandchildren thought they would be hosting their cocktail parties. I want their inheritance to be a ticket they have to buy at the door. The sheer, beautiful spite of it warmed me more than the whiskey ever could. And for the family, Arthur prompted, do we leave them a token amount? $1. It's sometimes done to show the disinheritance was intentional, not an oversight. I thought about it. $1 was too kind. It was a click. No, I said, my voice firm. Not $1. Not a single red cent. However, I do want a letter delivered to each of them upon my death. A personal letter from me. I dictated the broad strokes to Arthur, who took notes, his pen scratching across the paper. To Eleanor. I knew about the realtor. I heard every word. You didn't want to make me comfortable, you wanted to make me gone. You shall have your wish. You were gone from my legacy, as you were already gone from my heart. To Derek, power of attorney was always your goal, wasn't it? The power to control, the power to spend. You have no power here. Your signature on anything of mine is worthless. A lesson learned too late. To Kyle and Brett, the Porsche would have been a poor investment. The trip to Bali would not have fixed what is broken in you. I hope the cufflinks and the book remind you of the price of greed. They are all you will ever get from me. It was brutal. It was merciless. It was exactly what they deserved. Leaving Arthur's office, I felt a sense of profound purpose. The cancer in my pancreas was a silent, ticking bomb, but I was now the one holding the detonator. I would control the blast radius. I would direct the shockwave. The next few weeks were a masterclass in duplicity. I became to men. At home, I was fading Landon. It let my breakfast get cold, staring at the wall as if I'd forgotten how to eat. It'd ask Anna the same question 3 times in an hour. It'd take the cane and shuffle around the garden, muttering to Clara's roses. The family's visits became less frequent. Why waste time on a failing enterprise? They were just waiting for the final crash. Their calls became check-ins, their tone increasingly impatient, already moving into the management phase of my decline. But out in the world, I was the ghost of Landon past, moving with precision and stealth. I went to the university and spent 4 hours with Dr. Ishmael Reed, the psychiatrist. I aced every cognitive test he threw at me. I discussed market fluctuations, geopolitical strategies, and the poetry of Yeats. I was sharp, focused, and utterly lucid. At the end of the session, he sat back, removed his glasses, and said, Mr. Birch, I have evaluated men half your age who don't possess a fraction of your cognitive clarity. Whoever is suggesting you lack capacity is either deeply mistaken or deeply dishonest. I just smiled. Thank you, Doctor. I'll need that in writing. Back at Sterling, Croft, and Vance, with the video camera rolling, I signed the new sheaf of documents. I looked directly into the lens and spoke for 10 minutes without a single pause or stumble. I listed their betrayals like items on a balance sheet. I was calm, cold, and utterly convincing. Arthur, watching me, looked almost afraid. I was that persuasive, that ruthless. I began secretly transferring assets, liquidating certain stocks, moving funds into the foundation's accounts. I did it in small, untraceable increments, using offshore holding companies I'd set up years ago. I was a phantom in the machine of my own fortune, dismantling it from within, ensuring that by the time the vultures descended, the carcass would be picked clean. The physical toll was real. The days of performing, of maintaining the intense mental focus required for my double life, exhausted me. The cancer didn't care about my plans. It was a constant, grinding presence, a deep-seated fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. The pain was becoming more frequent, a dull, persistent ache that would sometimes sharpen into a knife twist. I kept a bottle of high-grade painkillers in my safe, prescribed by Evans for emergencies. I used them sparingly. I needed my wits about me. One afternoon, during a particularly bad pain spike, I was in my study, sweating and pale, trying to focus on a document. Anna found me. "You're in pain," she stated. It wasn't a question. "It's nothing," I gritted out. "It's not nothing," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. She wasn't my employee in that moment. She was a person looking at another person in suffering. "They're not here. You don't have to perform for me. Let me help." The simple kindness undid me. After weeks of being surrounded by grasping, greedy hands, a single offer of genuine help felt like a lifeline. I nodded, unable to speak. She went and got me a glass of water and my pills. She didn't ask questions. She just sat in the chair opposite me until the pain receded to a manageable level. "Thank you, Anna," I said, my voice hoarse. "You're carrying it all alone," she observed. "The illness, the secret, this plan of yours. It's a heavy weight for one man." "It's my weight to carry," I said, "my mess to clean up." She looked at me for a long moment, her gaze thoughtful. "You know, for a man who's supposedly losing his mind, you're the sanest person I've met in a long time. And the loneliest." Her words hit a nerve I didn't know was exposed. Lonely. Yes, that's what I was. I was surrounded by people, but I was utterly alone in my knowledge, in my mission. The loneliness was a colder companion than the cancer. The performance continued. The family, emboldened by my perceived decline, grew sloppy. They started having conversations in front of me, assuming I wasn't comprehending. Eleanor and Derek were in the hallway one day, just outside my study, their voices low but carrying. "The Historical Society valuation came in lower than expected," Derek said, his voice tense. "We might have to subdivide the land to get the full value out of it. Build a few McMansions on the west acreage. Whatever it takes," Eleanor replied, her voice brisk. "We need to maximize the return. God knows, the medical bills for this situation are going to be astronomical. We need to be prepared." I sat in my chair, my blood running cold. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively planning the dismemberment of my life's work, discussing it right outside my door as if I were already a ghost. The west acreage was where Clara's wildflower garden bloomed every spring. The thought of McMansions and manicured lawns covering it was a physical violation. It was the final confirmation. Any lingering, sentimental doubt I might have harbored the hope that maybe, just maybe, one of them would surprise me evaporated. They were a syndicate of greed, and I was the mark. That night, the pain was worse. I took a pill, but it barely took the edge off. I lay in the dark, in the two big bedded shed with Clara, and I felt the reality of my situation press down on me. The clock was ticking, audibly now. I was running out of time. I had to accelerate my plans. The next day, I put in a call to Arthur. "It's time," I said, without preamble. "I want to move the remaining assets. I want the foundation paperwork finalized. I want it done by the end of the week." "Landon, that's aggressive. We need to be careful too." "I don't have time for careful, Arthur," I snapped, the pain and the pressure making my temper flare. I have time for fast and airtight. Make it happen. I also made another decision. A final, theatrical flourish. If they thought I was fading, I would give them a show they would never forget. I would stage my own mental death before the physical one. I began to retreat further. I stopped coming downstairs. I had Anna tell them I was too tired for visitors. I let her describe my condition in increasingly grim terms. Hayes not eating. Hayes having trouble recognizing people. Hayes talking to Clara as if she's in the room. They ate it up. Their calls became even more infrequent. They were already in the mourning phase. But they weren't mourning me. They were mourning the delayed payout. One evening, Eleanor did come over. She came into my bedroom, where I was propped up on pillows, pretending to stare vacantly at a television that was off. "Daddy," she said, her voice still loud, as if speaking to someone deaf. I turned my head slowly. I looked at her, and I let my eyes go wide with a feigned, childlike fear. Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Where's Clara?" "She was just here. She brought me tea." Eleanor's face went through a fascinating series of transformations. First, shock. Then, a flicker of something that might have been genuine pain, the death of the father-daughter relationship, however flawed it had been. And finally, settling into a mask of resigned, practical pity. "It's me, Daddy. Eleanor, your daughter." I shook my head, shrinking back against the pillows. No, my Eleanor is a little girl. She has a yellow ribbon. You're an old woman." I saw the blow land. I saw her flinch. For a second, I felt a savage thrill of satisfaction. Then, just as quickly, it was replaced by a hollow ache. This was my daughter, and I was torturing her, and she deserved it. The moral calculus was exhausting. She stayed for 10 minutes, trying to engage the phantom of my mind, before giving up. She left the room, and I heard her on the phone in the hallway, her voice low and stressed. "Mom, it's worse. He didn't know me. He thought I was some old woman. No. It's time. We can't wait any longer. We need to get Derek to push harder on the power of attorney. We need to get control before Hayes completely gone." I closed my eyes. The performance was a success. It was also a gut-wrenching failure. The diagnosis double bluff had worked perfectly. I had learned everything I needed to know. I had the evidence. I had the plan. I was winning. So why did I feel like I was the one who had lost everything? The revenge was supposed to feel good. It just felt inevitable, like the final, logical step in an equation that had been written the day I made my first million, and they started seeing me as a wallet instead of a man. The stage was set. The players were in position, following the script I had written for them. The final act was approaching. I could feel it in my bones, in the increasing frequency of the pain that was no longer something I could easily hide or suppress. The real performance was coming to an end. Soon, the curtain would fall for real, and when it did, the aftermath would be my masterpiece. The pain became a tenant in my body, one that paid no rent and made constant, unreasonable demands. It started as a dull, persistent throb, a low-grade hum of wrongness in my core. But as the weeks bled into one another, it sharpened, intensified, becoming a serrated knife that twisted with every breath, every shift of my weight. The pills from Evans helped, but they also fogged the edges of my mind, and I couldn't afford that. Not now. Every clear-headed moment was a resource to be spent on my final campaign. I began rationing the painkillers, enduring the worst of it during the day, so I could think, so I could maintain the facade for the increasingly rare family inspections. It saved the larger doses for the nights, when the darkness and the silence made the pain feel louder, more monstrous. In those hours, propped up in bed, sweating and gritting my teeth, the line between my performance and my reality blurred. I wasn't just pretending to be a sick, confused old man, I was becoming one. The cancer was my method actor, digging deep into the role. Anna became my unexpected anchor. She saw through the performance to the raw suffering beneath. She never spoke of my real illness, respecting the pact of silence he'd forged with Evans, but she adapted her care. Cool cloths from my forehead during pain spikes, tea instead of coffee when my stomach rebelled, a steady, silent presence in the corner of the room when the loneliness threatened to swallow me whole. One particularly bad night, the pain was a white-hot brand searing through my abdomen. I couldn't stifle a groan. Anna was there in an instant, her face etched with a concern that felt different from the staged professionalism of before. "It's time, Mr. Birch," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You need proper medication. This isn't something you can just fill away." "I can't," I gasped, the words ragged. "The fog, I need to be clear. I have things to do." "You're no good to anyone passed out from agony," she countered, her practicality a lifeline. "There's a balance. Let me help you find it." She took over the management of my pills with a quiet efficiency, giving me just enough to take the sharpest edge off the pain without pulling me under into a stupor. In doing so, she gave me back a few precious hours of lucidity each day. I didn't thank her with words. I couldn't. Our understanding had moved beyond that. It was a partnership forged in the strange, secret heart of my war. The family, oblivious to the real battle being waged, saw only the effects of my feigned decline. My weight loss, which was now very real, they attributed to forgetting to eat. The pallor of my skin, the dark circles under my eyes, all proof positive of my advancing dementia. Their visits, once weekly obligations, became even more sporadic. Why bother with the grim spectacle? They were just waiting for the phone to ring. Except for Derek. Derek, the persistent bastard, smelled blood in the water. His visits became more frequent, more targeted. He was a hunter, and he could sense the herd was thinning. He'd show up with his briefcase, his folders, his pen. Always the pen. He cornered me in the study one afternoon. I was having a relatively good day, pain-wise, but I was leaning heavily on the act, slumped in my chair, staring blankly at a book of poetry I couldn't focus enough to read. "Uncle Landon," he said, oozing that fake, smarmy concern that made my skin crawl. "You're looking well." I didn't respond. I just kept staring at the page, pretending the words were swimming. "I know these are difficult times," he pressed on, undeterred, "and I want to make them easier. I've spoken with the bank. There are some irregularities, bills going unpaid. It's becoming a problem. They need a point of contact, someone with authority." He laid a single sheet of paper on the desk in front of me. It was a limited power of attorney document, specifically for financial affairs. Had scaled back his ambitions. Not full control, just access to the accounts. A foot in the door. "Just your signature here, Uncle Landon," he said, his voice a low, persuasive murmur. "It will let me help you. To keep the lights on. To make sure Anna gets paid. You want Anna to get paid, don't you?" He was using the nurse's wages as a guilt trip. The sheer audacity of it almost made me break character. I wanted to pick up the letter opener on my desk and plunge it into his hand. Instead, I let my eyes drift slowly from the poetry book to the document. I let my hand tremble as I reached for it. I picked it up, holding it close to my face as if I could barely see it. I let the silence stretch, let him lean in, anticipation tightening his features. Then I did something I hadn't planned. A moment of pure, spiteful inspiration. I looked up at him, and I let a flicker of the old Landon Birch shine through the feigned confusion. Just for a second. A flash of cold, intelligent malice in my eyes. "Derek," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than it had been in weeks. "Do you really think him that far gone?" The effect was electric. He jerked back as if it slapped him. His face went pale, his eyes wide with shock and sudden, panicked fear. Had been so sure of the narrative, so confident in my decline, that this glimpse of the real me was utterly terrifying. Just as quickly, I let the mask drop back into place. My eyes went vacant again. My head tilted. I frowned at the paper. So many words, I mumbled, my voice sliding back into a weak, querulous old man's tone. I let the document slip from my fingers and flutter to the floor. Tired, so tired. I closed my eyes, feigning immediate, exhausted sleep. I heard him stand there for a full minute, breathing heavily. I could feel his confusion, his uncertainty. Had he imagined it? Was it a moment of lucidity, a final flare of the candle before it guttered out? He didn't know. And that doubt, that seed of uncertainty, was more valuable to me than if he'd outright refused him. A refusal could be argued against. A moment of terrifying clarity, followed by a lapse back into confusion. That was unnerving. That would make him second-guess everything. He left without another word, leaving the document on the floor. Anna found it later and handed it to me, without comment. I tore it into 100 pieces and fed it to the fire in the grate. The flames consumed it, and I felt a savage satisfaction. Let him try again. Let him wonder. But the encounter had taken a lot out of me. The pain returned with a vengeance that evening, a punishing reminder that my body was a traitor, no matter how strong my will. Lying in the dark, listening to the grandfather clock tick away the seconds in the hall, I knew I was running out of time. The final moves had to be made. The next morning, I called Arthur Vance. My voice was weak, but my intent was iron. "It's done, Arthur," I whispered into the phone, conscious as Anna, though complicit, was in the next room. The foundation, the trusts, the museum designation for the house. "Is it all executed?" "It is, Landon," he said, his voice somber. "Everything is signed, sealed, and notarized. The video testimony is chillingly effective. The psychiatric evaluation is locked in my safe. The fortress is built. It is, if I may say so, a work of art. A terrible, brilliant work of art. Good," I breathed, a wave of relief washing over me so powerful it almost eclipsed the pain. "Now, one last thing. I want you to schedule a meeting with the family. Here, at the house." Arthur was silent for a moment. "Landon, is that wise?" "In your condition, my condition is exactly why it's wise," I interrupted. "I want them all in one room. Eleanor, Mark, the boys, Derek. I want to see their faces one last time. And I want you to be here, as my lawyer." "To do what?" he asked, suspicion in his tone. "To read the current will," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "The old one. The one that leaves them everything." I could practically hear his confusion crackling down the line. "The old one. Landon, why on earth would we do that? It's been superseded. It's invalid." "They don't know that," I said softly. "I want to give them one last moment of hope. I want to see the greed shining in their eyes. I want them to leave this house thinking they've won. It will make the eventual reveal so much sweeter. This is the final scene of my play. Arthur, I need you to be my stage manager." He understood then. He didn't like it, I could tell by his prolonged silence, but he understood. He was a lawyer. He appreciated the elegance of a long con, the beauty of a perfectly executed legal strategy that was also a personal vengeance. "I'll arrange it," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "When?" "Tomorrow," I said. "No point in waiting." The day of the meeting arrived. I instructed Anna to make me presentable. I wanted to look ill, but not comatose. I needed to be conscious for this. She helped me into a dressing gown and sat me in my large armchair in the study, positioning me so I was facing the door. She plumped the pillows behind my back and put a blanket over my legs. I declined the painkillers. I needed to feel every second of this. They arrived together, a murder of crows in expensive clothing. Eleanor, her face a mask of solemn duty. Mark, hovering behind her, looking uncomfortable. Kyle and Brett, smelling of expensive cologne and impatience. And Derek, his eyes sharp and calculating, his briefcase in hand. He was probably hoping to get a signature after the reading. Arthur Vance was already there, standing by the fireplace, a sober, imposing figure. He held a leather-bound document wallet. The family filed in, their eyes darting to me, then to Arthur, then to each other. They took seats on the sofas arranged around the room, a silent, expectant audience. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur began, his lawyer voice filling the room. "Landon asked me to be here today to review the terms of his last will and testament with all of you present." A palpable wave of anticipation went through them. They leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Eleanor smoothed her skirt. Derek adjusted his tie. This was it, the payoff they'd been waiting for. Arthur opened the wallet and pulled out the old will. He cleared his throat and began to read. The language was dry, legal, but to them, it must have sounded like poetry. He outlined the trust funds, the disbursements, the division of the estate, the house to Eleanor, portfolios to Derek, generous, obscenely generous, sums to Kyle and Brett. I watched their faces. I saw the greed, naked and unadorned. Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears of triumph, not loss. Derek allowed himself a small, tight smile of satisfaction. Kyle and Brett exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated joy, no doubt mentally spending their windfall on fast cars and faster women. They didn't look at me, not once. They were so consumed by the vision of their future wealth that the dying man in the chair until as well not have existed. Arthur finished reading. He looked up. Are there any questions? There were none. Only a roomful of satisfied heirs. Daddy, Eleanor said, finally turning to me, her voice dripping with a faux sweetness that made me nauseous. Thank you. This is such a comfort. Well, take such good care of everything. You don't have to worry about a thing. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, my expression blank. Inside, I was howling. This was the moment. This was the confirmation of every rotten thing I knew about them. Derek stood up, approaching Arthur. We'll need copies of that, of course. For our records. Of course, Arthur said, his face unreadable. He handed out pre-prepared copies from his document wallet. They took them like holy relics. The meeting broke up quickly after that. There was no reason to stay. The prize was won. They made their excuses. Their goodbyes to me were perfunctory, pats on the shoulder, empty words. They couldn't get out of the house fast enough, already itching to start planning their new lives. I listened to their cars disappear down the driveway. The silence they left behind was profound. Arthur came and stood before me. He looked down at me, his expression a mixture of pity and awe. My God, Landon, he whispered. You were right. Every single one of them. I know, I said, my voice a dry rasp. The energy the performance had required was gone, leaving me hollowed out and exhausted. The pain was returning, a distant thunder growing closer. It's done, he said. The new will is the legal document. They have nothing. They have their copies of the old one, I said, a faint smile touching my lips. Let them have their dreams for a little while longer. After Arthur left, the house felt emptier than ever. The grand performance was over. The audience had taken their bows and left the theatre, believing the show had ended exactly as they'd hoped. They didn't know the real finale was yet to come, and that it would drop on them like a bomb. The days that followed were a slow, painful drift towards an inevitable shore. The pain was now a constant, grinding reality. I surrendered to the pills more often, letting the fog claim me 4 hours at a time. The world became a blur of half-remembered conversations with Anna, of sunlight moving across the floor, of the taste of broth, of the relentless, ticking clock. I thought of Clara often in those foggy hours. I apologized to her for the bitterness, for the loneliness, for the vengeful old man I had become. I hoped she would understand. I hoped that the animal sanctuaries, the kids running through her beloved garden, would make up for it. One afternoon, I was lucid enough to ask Anna to bring me a small box from the top shelf of my wardrobe. It was an old thing, made of rosewood. Inside were not stocks or bonds, but memories. A lock of Clara's hair tied with a faded ribbon. The tiny bronze baby shoes of our daughter, Eleanor, from a time before avarice had hardened her heart. A photograph of us all on a beach, a lifetime ago, smiling, happy, a family. I held the photograph for a long time, my vision blurring. This was the true inheritance. This was what I was really losing, what they had lost long ago. The money, the house, the stocks, it was all just scenery. The real tragedy was the love that had curdled into entitlement, the connection that had been replaced by a transaction. I wept then, not for myself, and not for them. I wept for what could have been, for the family that lived only in a faded photograph in her rosewood box. The end, when it came, was not dramatic. It was a quiet surrender. The pain had receded, replaced by a deep, pervasive coldness, as if my blood was slowly turning to ice. I could feel a great, heavy fatigue pulling me down, inviting me to sleep. Anna was there, holding my hand. Her grip was firm, warm, real. "It's okay, Mr. Birch," she said softly, her voice the only anchor in the rising tide of darkness. "You can let go now. It's over. You did what you set out to do." I tried to speak, to thank her for her kindness, for her part in my strange, bitter play. But no words came. My eyes found hers, and I hoped she could see the gratitude there. The last thing I saw was not the faces of my family, not the walls of my expensive tomb of a house. It was Clara, young and beautiful, standing in her wildflower garden, smiling, holding out her hand to me. And then, nothing. The phone calls were made. The arrangements began. The family, alerted, descended for the final time. This time, there was no performance to maintain. They could be themselves completely. The house, which had been so still and silent in my final days, was suddenly filled with the sound of their voices. But they weren't voices of mourning. They were voices of business. The funeral should be small, Eleanor was saying to Derek, her voice carrying from the hallway into the study, where I lay in my open casket. No point in a big show. Simple and elegant. "I've already contacted the auction house for the art collection," Derek replied. "Sotheby's. They'll get the best price. We need to move quickly before the market dips." In the living room, Carl and Brett were arguing over who would get my Mercedes. "You got the last car, man," Brett whined. "It's my turn. The Porsche is gonna be epic." They were dividing the spoils before my body was even cold. The copies of the old will were their Bible, their guarantee. The reading of the actual will was a mere formality they had to endure before the real business of spending could begin. The funeral was, as Eleanor decreed, small and elegant. A handful of my old business associates, looking uncomfortable, a few distant relatives. The family sat in the front pew of the church, a united front of black designer clothing and appropriately somber expressions. They played their parts perfectly. A week later, they all gathered back in my study, their study now, for the official reading of the will by Arthur Vance. The mood was light, almost celebratory. Glasses of my best scotch were already poured. Eleanor was making notes on a legal pad, a list of priorities: sell house, contact interior designer for penthouse, new car for Mark. Arthur stood by the desk, his face grim. He placed his document wallet on the polished surface. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice devoid of its usual professional warmth. "Oh, get on with it, Arthur," Derek said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "We all know what it says. Let's make this quick. I have a meeting with the portfolio managers at 2. Arthur fixed him with a cold stare. "I think you'll want to pay very close attention." He opened the wallet, but he didn't pull out the old, familiar document. He pulled out a new, thicker sheaf of papers. The family didn't notice at first, too busy with their own confident chatter. Then Arthur began to read. "I, Landon Alistair Birch, being of sound and disposing mind and memory, do hereby make, publish, and declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." The room went very quiet. Eleanor frowned. "Arthur, what is this?" "That's not the—" "Please refrain from interrupting," Arthur said, his voice like steel. He continued. The language was complex, legal, but the meaning was brutally, terrifyingly clear. He spoke of the Clara and Landon Birch Foundation. He detailed the endowment for the Historical Society and the conversion of the house into a museum. He listed the dissolution of all previous trusts. He read the clauses of disinheritance, the specific, explicit revocation of any bequest to Eleanor, to Mark, to Carl, to Brett, to Derek. He cited their actions, their behaviors, their demonstrated avarice during the time of my feigned illness. It was all there, in cold, unassailable legal prose. The silence in the room was no longer confident. It was stunned, horrified. It was the silence of a bomb blast aftermath. When he finished, the document was met with absolute, dead quiet. Then, the room erupted. "This is outrageous," Derek shouted, leaping to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is a fraud. He was incompetent. He had dementia. We have a diagnosis. We'll challenge this. We'll have it overturned in a week." Arthur didn't flinch. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out more documents. He held up the first. This is a full psychiatric evaluation conducted by Dr. Ishmael Reed of the University Medical Center, dated after Mr. Burke's supposed diagnosis. It declares him to be in full, unimpeachable possession of his mental faculties. He dropped it on the desk with a thud. Then he held up the second, a digital tablet, and this is a video recording of Mr. Birch, made on the same date, clearly and lucidly stating his intentions, detailing your behaviors, and explaining his reasons for disinheriting each and every one of you. It is remarkably comprehensive. He pressed play. My voice, strong, clear, and icily calm, filled the room. I listed their sins, one by one. Eleanor's push to sell the house, Derek's power of attorney attempts, the boy's greed. I spoke for 10 minutes, and with every passing second, their faces grew paler, their rage curdling into a sick, dawning horror. When the video ended, the silence returned, but it was a different silence now. It was the silence of utter, total defeat. Arthur then handed each of them a sealed envelope. A personal letter from your grandfather, he said to the boys. From your uncle, he said to Derek. From your father, he said to Eleanor, his voice devoid of any sympathy. They took them with trembling hands. They opened them. I wasn't there to see their faces as they read my final, parting words, the brutal, succinct explanations for their ruin. But I can imagine it, the shock, the disbelief, the sheer, catastrophic understanding that they had been played, that the old man they thought was a fool had been the master of the game all along. Their inheritance was not wealth. It was the precise, detailed knowledge of how they had lost it. It was the realization that their greed had been their downfall. It was a lifetime of wondering what they could have had if they had just been better people. As they sat there, surrounded by the opulence of a house that was no longer theirs, staring at the cold, implacable face of my lawyer, the true nature of my revenge became clear. I hadn't just taken their money. I had given them a ghost that would haunt them for the rest of their days, the ghost of their own wretchedness, and that was an inheritance they could never, ever spend.